In 1985, Detroit, Michigan, a quiet neighborhood held a secret that would haunt a mother for decades. Outside a modest house on Elm Street, a 6-year-old boy named Ethan Parker played in the front yard. The sun was bright, the air warm, and everything seemed normal. But in the blink of an eye, Ethan vanished. One moment he was laughing, chasing a ball across the lawn, and the next, he was gone. No trace, no explanation, only the echo of his small footsteps fading into the distance. His mother, Linda Parker, immediately realized something was wrong. Panic gripped her chest as she ran outside, calling his name. She searched the streets, the alleys, the neighbors' yards, but Ethan was nowhere to be found. Her heart pounded with fear. Every second felt like an eternity. Every passing car made her hope rise and then fall. The police were called, and an investigation began. Officers combed the neighborhood, interviewed witnesses, and reviewed the area. But after days of searching, the leads went cold. He likely ran away, one officer suggested. Another said something worse. We fear he may not be alive. Each word was a dagger to Linda's heart, but she refused to accept it. Friends and family tried to console her. They said, "Linda, it's time to move on. Focus on the life you still have," they pleaded. But she could not. The idea that her child might be lost forever, it was unbearable. She could not sit silently while the world moved on. She would not let hope die. For the next 40 years, Linda never stopped searching. Every day, she woke with a mission. Flyers plastered the city, each one with Ethan's photo, his small smiling face, and a plea for anyone with information to come forward. She called shelters, hospitals, even prisons, asking if anyone had seen him. Each phone call was a mixture of hope and heartbreak. Each dead end was a painful reminder of the unknown. Linda followed every lead, no matter how small or improbable. She traveled to neighboring states, spent hours in libraries looking through old newspapers, and spoke to strangers who might have seen a child matching Ethan's description. She interviewed retired police officers, private investigators, and even people who claimed to have seen him. Many leads ended in disappointment, some in heartbreak, but her resolve never wavered. The years were long, but her determination was unwavering. Linda's life became a testament to a mother's love, unyielding, relentless, and patient. She faced loneliness, criticism, and the weariness of endless searching. Yet every night, she whispered Ethan's name, praying that somehow, somewhere, he was alive. People around her slowly started to believe the worst. They thought Ethan had died. They assumed the boy who vanished on that sunny day in Detroit had been lost to the world. But Linda held on to a quiet conviction. Deep in her heart, she knew something no one else could see. Ethan was still out there. And here lies the twist. Ethan wasn't dead. He had been taken far from the life he knew, forced into circumstances no child should ever survive. His story, one of pain and unimaginable hardship, had been hidden from the world. For 40 years, he lived in silence, while his mother never gave up. Linda's journey is not just about a lost child. It is about a mother's refusal to surrender, a heart that refused to break completely, and a hope that never dimmed. She embodies the very essence of relentless love, proving that no matter how dark the world may seem, the search for the ones we love is never in vain. Before we continue, if you believe that no mother should ever stop searching for her child, take a moment and support this channel. One click from you can help bring more missing stories to the world and give hope to those who are still waiting. Linda's story is just beginning. Her search will take us into a world of unimaginable suffering, resilience, and ultimately reunion. But for now, remember her unwavering heart and let it remind us all, a mother's love never gives up. It was a warm summer afternoon in Detroit, 1985, and 6-year-old Ethan Parker was playing outside his home, unaware that his life was about to change forever. Across the street, a couple watched him from the window of their modest house. They seemed friendly to anyone who might glance their way, but their intentions were far from kind. The man was Ronald Briggs, and his partner was Marcia Lee. Both would later be revealed as dangerous predators, capable of cruelty beyond imagination. On that day, they approached Ethan with smiles and kind words. "Hey, buddy, come with us," Marcia called softly. She held out a shiny new toy, a bright, colorful action figure. Ethan's eyes lit up. He had never seen anything like it before. For a moment, it seemed like a dream. He had been promised a gift, something exciting, and he trusted them. Ronald added, "Don't worry, little guy. We just want to show you something cool." They made it sound harmless, playful, and fun. Ethan hesitated for a moment, glancing back at his house, but the lure of the toy was too strong. He took their hands, and in that instant his childhood slipped away. They walked him quietly to their car, a dark sedan parked just a few houses down. Nobody seemed to notice, or perhaps no one realized what was happening. Within minutes, Ethan was in the back seat, his small hands gripping the edge of the seat, his mind filled with confusion and fear he didn't yet understand. The couple smiled at each other, hiding the truth of what was about to unfold. The journey began toward Toledo, Ohio, over 90 miles away. Ethan tried to speak, but Ronald shushed him, telling him everything was fine. The reality was terrifying. Ethan was being taken far from home, far from safety, and into a world designed to break him. By the time they arrived, the couple had already planned the next steps. He would be kept hidden, isolated, and completely dependent on them. Back in Detroit, panic erupted. Linda Parker called the police the moment Ethan didn't return. An investigation began immediately, but clues were scarce. Witnesses were few, and the couple had covered their tracks carefully. The police filed it as a federal kidnapping case, alerting agencies across state lines. But despite every effort, the trail grew cold. Ronald and Marcia had vanished with Ethan, leaving no trace behind. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Linda's hope began to fray at the edges, though she refused to let it snap completely. She traveled to Toledo herself, knocked on doors, spoke to strangers, and contacted local authorities. But it was as if Ethan had disappeared from the earth. Every dead end felt like another brick in the wall separating mother and son. Despite the fear, the uncertainty, and the passing years, Linda's heart clung to one undeniable truth. She would never give up. The memory of Ethan's small hands, his laughter, and the way he used to call her name in the mornings stayed alive in her mind. She would not allow the darkness to claim hope. The abduction was more than a crime. It was the beginning of a nightmare that would last decades. Ethan's life, stolen at 6 years old, was now trapped in the hands of people who saw him not as a child, but as something to control and exploit. And while the world assumed he was lost forever, his mother's resolve became a quiet, unwavering force that refused to accept the impossible. In the midst of her grief and frustration, Linda continued to fight. Flyers, phone calls, letters, and every possible lead became her lifeline. And somewhere far away in Toledo, Ethan's life had changed in ways no 6-year-old should ever endure. The darkness had begun, but the spark of hope, from a mother who refused to quit, still burned. Linda Parker's story was just beginning, and the world had no idea that one day, decades later, her relentless search would finally lead her to the truth. The journey would be long, painful, and shocking, but it was one she would not abandon, not for a single day, not for a single hour. After being taken to Toledo, Ethan Parker's life changed in ways no child should ever endure. The basement of the house where he was kept became his world, a dark, cold, and lonely place with no windows and barely enough room to move. From the moment he arrived, he understood that this was not a temporary stay. This was a prison. He slept on the hard, damp floor, often chained at night to prevent any attempt at escape. Hunger became a constant companion. Meals, when given, were small and meager, barely enough to keep him alive. The couple, Ronald Briggs and Marcia Lee, made him perform tasks far beyond the strength of a child. He carried heavy objects, cleaned endlessly, and labored for hours on end. Every mistake brought punishment, a harsh slap, a scream, a reminder that disobedience would be met with pain. But the physical abuse was only part of the torment. They told Ethan that if he ever tried to run, his mother would die. They used her name to control him, to make him afraid, to make him believe that the love he still felt for her could bring her harm. Fear became a cage as real as the chains around his wrists. In that basement, Ethan learned to hide his tears, to swallow his screams, and to exist quietly, like a shadow that nobody noticed. Years passed. Ethan grew from a small, frightened child into a scrawny teenager. His body stiffened from labor, his mind hardened by years of relentless oppression. He began to understand the patterns of the people who held him, when they would return, how they would punish, what words would cause pain, and which actions would bring even harsher consequences. He stopped asking questions. He stopped hoping for a normal life. In the 1990s, the couple moved Ethan to a remote property near Flint, Michigan. It was even more isolated than before. Surrounded by woods and fields, the chances of escape seemed impossible. Here, Ethan's world became even smaller. The darkness followed him wherever he went. Days, months, and years bled into one another. The small joys of childhood, the laughter, the friends, the simple pleasure of freedom, were things he barely remembered. By the time he reached his 20s, Ethan was an exhausted adult trapped in a body that had endured decades of cruelty. 40 years had passed since he was taken from his mother, and every one of those years had been filled with suffering. He stopped dreaming about a life he might have had. Yet, in the deepest corners of his mind, one image remained vivid: the face of his mother, Linda Parker. It was a memory that no amount of pain could erase. Even in the darkest moments, that memory kept him alive. It reminded him that there was a world beyond the chains, beyond the fear, beyond the cruelty. Every time he closed his eyes, he imagined her calling his name, searching for him, never giving up. It was the one thing that no abuser could steal. Hope, quiet but unwavering, flickering in his heart like a candle against the dark. The years in captivity were long, brutal, and merciless. Ethan's childhood had been stolen. His adolescence had been defined by fear. His adulthood had been trapped in shadows. Yet through all of it, the thought of his mother never left him. It was this connection, invisible yet unbreakable, that would eventually guide him toward rescue. Ethan Parker's life in captivity was a story of unimaginable suffering, but it was also a story of endurance. The human spirit, even when battered and broken, has a remarkable capacity to hold on to hope. And for Ethan, hope was not a dream of toys or laughter. It was the memory of his mother, a light that would one day lead him back to the life he had lost. Years had passed, and Ethan Parker had become almost invisible to the world. He moved quietly through the days, careful to avoid attention, his bruised body and haunted eyes hidden beneath layers of fear. But everything began to change when a new neighbor arrived in a remote area near Flint, Michigan. His name was Officer Daniel Brooks. A man of calm observation and sharp instincts, Daniel had chosen this quiet neighborhood to retire from active duty while still remaining vigilant in his community. At first, he noticed little, just a man wandering at night, his movements stiff, hesitant, almost as if he were afraid of being seen. But something about the way Ethan moved, the way he avoided eye contact, and the faint, dark marks on his face, caught Daniel's attention. Daniel didn't approach him immediately. He knew that a wrong move could make things worse, so he observed from a distance. For weeks, he watched. He noticed Ethan's routine, how he stepped out only at certain times, how he flinched at sudden noises, and how he seemed to shrink into himself whenever anyone looked directly at him. Each day confirmed what Daniel had begun to suspect. Something was very wrong. One morning, while Ethan was taking out the trash, Daniel caught a glimpse of his wrists. The sight froze him. Deep, angry marks encircled them, faint but unmistakable. Chains had left their imprint. That was the moment Daniel realized this was no ordinary man struggling with life. This was someone held captive, someone who had suffered silently for years. Without alerting anyone, Daniel began quietly collecting evidence. He filmed the property from a safe distance, noting patterns and routines. He documented the behavior of the people around Ethan, the sounds coming from the property, and the odd comings and goings. He made timelines, wrote down every suspicious detail, and prepared a record that would one day help rescue the man trapped in those walls. Days turned into nights of careful surveillance. Daniel stayed patient, careful not to alert the captors. And then, one night, his fears were confirmed in the most terrifying way. A piercing scream shattered the stillness of the neighborhood. It was loud, desperate, filled with pain, something no human should ever endure. Daniel knew instantly that this was Ethan, crying out in fear, in agony, in hope. That scream was the first real crack in the decades-long darkness that had enveloped Ethan's life. Daniel's instincts told him the time for careful watching was over. Action was needed, but it had to be precise. Every piece of evidence he had collected would be critical. Every observation he had made could mean the difference between life and death. For the first time in 40 years, the possibility of freedom edged closer. The chains on Ethan's wrists were not just metal. They were the symbol of decades of pain. And now, thanks to Daniel Brooks, a lifeline was finally reaching him. The night had grown cold and silent near Flint, Michigan, but inside a small, remote property, decades of darkness were about to be shattered. Thanks to the careful work of Officer Daniel Brooks, law enforcement now had enough evidence to act. A team quietly surrounded the house, moving with precision. Every movement was calculated. Every sound could mean the difference between life and death. Inside, Ethan Parker remained unaware that his life was about to change forever. He was in a locked shed, pale, weak, and trembling. His hands bore the marks of chains, his body stiff from years of forced labor, and his eyes carried the weight of decades of fear. The small, cramped space had been his entire world for 40 years, and he had almost stopped believing in freedom. Almost. Then the door burst open. Officers shouted, demanding him to stay calm, while another unlocked the shed. Ethan froze, unsure if this was a dream or another form of danger. He flinched at the sight of the uniformed men, their weapons, their orders, but something in their tone, in their eyes, told him this was different. Something told him they were here to help. One officer knelt beside him and asked gently, "What's your name?" Ethan's voice was barely a whisper. He looked down at his shaking hands and murmured, I'm Ethan." The team quickly confirmed his identity, running his fingerprints through the national database. And then, the moment that would change both their lives forever. Match found, missing since 1985. 40 years had passed since that sunny day in Detroit when a mother's worst nightmare began. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, Linda Parker, now 68 years old, was at home when her phone rang. The voice on the other end was steady, professional, but the words hit her like a lightning bolt. "Ma'am, we found your son." For a moment, Linda could not breathe. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the floor, tears streaming down her face. 40 years of searching, of sleepless nights, of unanswered prayers, had finally led to this moment. She whispered his name aloud, over and over, unable to believe that this was real. "Ethan, Ethan, it's really you." Back in Flint, Ethan was being helped out of the shed. He blinked against the night, feeling the cold air for the first time in decades. His body was weak, but his heart raced with a mixture of fear, disbelief, and a spark of hope he hadn't felt since childhood. The officers reassured him that he was safe, that he was finally free, and that his mother was on her way. The reunion was inevitable, and yet nothing could prepare either of them for the flood of emotion that would follow. The boy who had been taken, the man who had survived unimaginable horrors, was about to see the mother who had never stopped fighting for him. If this moment touched your heart, take a second to like this video. Your support helps these real stories reach more people who might need hope. Ethan Parker's story, once trapped in darkness, was finally stepping into the light. And in that light, decades of pain, fear, and uncertainty would meet a mother's unwavering love for the first time in 40 years. The ambulance arrived at the hospital just as the early morning sun began to rise over Flint, Michigan. Inside, Ethan Parker, weak, pale, and trembling, was wheeled into a quiet room. His heart raced with a strange mixture of fear and hope. He had survived 40 years of darkness, and now, for the first time in decades, he sensed that something good might finally happen. Then the door opened, and there she was. Linda Parker, his mother, now 68 years old, standing at the threshold. Her eyes, red from tears and sleepless nights, were fixed on him. Time seemed to collapse. The decades of pain, the years of searching, the endless nights of worry, all of it came crashing down in a single, impossible moment. Ethan saw her, and something inside him gave way. The man who had endured decades of abuse, starvation, and isolation broke down like a child. He sank to his knees, trembling, tears streaming freely down his face. And Linda ran to him. She pulled him into her arms, holding him as tightly as she had imagined for 40 long years. They clung to each other, shaking, crying, whispering each other's names over and over. Decades of separation, decades of fear, decades of lost time, all melted away in that embrace. Linda stroked his hair and whispered, "I never stopped looking for you, Ethan. Never. I never gave up." And Ethan, his voice barely audible, replied, "I knew. I knew you were out there. I never forgot you." Meanwhile, law enforcement had moved quickly against the culprits. Ronald Briggs and Marcia Lee, the people responsible for Ethan's captivity, were arrested without incident. They were charged with kidnapping, human trafficking, and aggravated assault, crimes that spanned decades and left scars far beyond what the law could measure. The court proceedings were swift and decisive. Both received multiple life sentences, ensuring that they would never harm another soul. Ethan began therapy immediately, a necessary step to rebuild a life that had been stolen from him. Every session was a step toward healing, toward learning how to live outside the chains and fear that had defined his existence for 40 years. Linda was by his side, supporting him, encouraging him, and showing him that it was possible to rediscover trust, love, and hope. Every day, Linda made up for lost time. She cooked meals he had never had, told him stories of his childhood, showed him pictures of family and friends, and reminded him that he was finally safe. Each small moment, holding hands, sharing laughter, even arguing over trivial things, was a reclamation of the life that had been stolen. The reunion was more than emotional, it was justice. For Ethan, freedom. For Linda, vindication. And for the world, a powerful reminder that even after decades of darkness, courage, love, and persistence could bring a child home. The nightmare was over, and the promise of a new life had finally begun. Ethan Parker's story is more than a tale of survival. It is a powerful reminder of the consequences of neglect, cruelty, and indifference. For parents, it is a warning. Every day you ignore, dismiss, or underestimate the needs of your child, you risk losing them, not just physically, but emotionally. A moment of carelessness, a lapse in attention, or a harsh word can create scars that last a lifetime. Parents hold the power to protect, to guide, and to love, but with that power comes responsibility. For children, Ethan's story is a cautionary tale as well. Running away from home, rebelling without reason, or turning your back on the ones who care for you may seem like freedom in the moment, but the world can be far more dangerous than you imagine. There are people who exploit weakness, who prey on fear, and who can steal a lifetime in a single act. Ethan's 40 years in captivity are proof of how quickly a child's life can be derailed and how long the consequences can last. For those who commit abuse, whether through neglect, violence, or cruelty, Ethan's story is a warning. The law will catch up. Justice may be delayed, but it is never denied. The suffering inflicted on another human being is not invisible. Each action leaves traces, marks, and consequences that can never be erased. Ronald Briggs and Marcia Lee are living proof. Decades of abuse led to ultimate accountability, and they will never harm another soul. Yet, Amid all this darkness, there is light. Linda Parker's unwavering search, her refusal to give up, and her relentless hope are what ultimately brought Ethan home. Her courage reminds us that hope is not passive, it is an action, a determination to fight for what is right, even when the odds are stacked against you. Her message is simple, yet profound. Never abandon hope, and never abandon your child. Every story like Ethan's is a call to action. It is a plea for vigilance, compassion, and love. 1 second of carelessness can destroy a lifetime, but 1 moment of courage, 1 act of perseverance, can restore it. Parents, children, communities, all of us have a role to play in protecting the vulnerable and standing against injustice. This story also reminds us that the human spirit is resilient. No matter how long the darkness lasts, no matter how deep the suffering, hope and determination can prevail. Ethan's reunion with his mother, the justice served to his captors, and the life he is now rebuilding show that even in the harshest circumstances, healing is possible. If you want more real survivor stories like this, subscribe. Your support keeps these voices alive. Each subscription, each like, each share helps bring awareness to those who cannot speak for themselves. It ensures that stories of survival, courage, and hope reach the people who need them most. Ethan's story ends in light, but its lesson echoes forever. Protect, cherish, and never give up on those you love. Darkness may last for years, but a mother's love and hope can outlast it all.